You're not gonna believe this, but Tony Fauci on the stand in front of Congress, lying, weaseling, and otherwise. Oh boy, I don't know how this country's gonna get through this. Hello everyone, I am Dr. Chris Martinson. This is your scouting report. Looks like it is, it's June now, June 3rd, 2024, and Fauci's in front of Congress, I guess, and boy, as you know, I've been tracking him for a long time. This guy, besides having conspired to hide stuff from FOIA and FOIA discovery, despite having conspired to hide the lab leak or lab origin theory of COVID by pushing this very, very false, very fake natural origin narrative, despite lying and being caught lying several times about how much funding he had given to EcoHealth Alliance and personally through NIAID, really oversaw those programs, as well as really lying about what gain of function is and pretending he's all confused in one string of testimony saying, I don't recall or I don't remember 212 separate times. But this probably takes the cake, the stuff that's emerging right now. Like, how could you not be angry about, say, this, that he confesses that, they made up this rule, the 6 feet social distancing and masking kids just sort of came out of nowhere. Let's listen in.
Anybody who's looking at this carefully realizes that there's a distinct anti-science flavor to this. So if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about. But if they get up and really aim their bullets at Tony Fauci, well, people could recognize there's a person there, so it's easy to criticize. But they're really criticizing science. No. Because I represent science.
Dr. Anthony Fauci now admitting social distancing wasn't based on science. Fauci telling a House committee this week the idea, standing 6 feet apart, quote, just sort of appeared.
Right. From there? Come on. Just sort of appeared. I don't know where that came from. It just sort of appeared. And masking. We're going to mask children up. In fact, I have these horrifying pictures of adults standing around unmasked while all these kids who need to read social facial cues and do all these developmental things that are very, very milestone based and of which there's only a short period of time. If you take a kid who's 3 and mask them until they're 4, 25% of their life has been masked, right? Horrifying pictures of the kids all masked, but Kathy Hochul, governor of New York, plus all these educators standing around unmasked with all these little kids in front of them like trophies, like they were out on a safari and these were like little things they'd bagged out there in the Serengeti. I don't know. It's just really awful. So that's what's appearing. So you would think anybody who just anti-scientifically just made it up on the spot and just like, we just, I don't know, it just sort of appeared, and then harmed an entire generation of children, you would think, of course, the natural instinct of any parent would be to be very angry about that and to be very mad about that, right? Because we were being lectured and harangued that science, you're anti-science if you don't follow these rules. Well, these rules weren't based on science. So, in fact, you were pro-science if you demanded more data, and they didn't give us any, but then they damaged an entire generation of children. In fact, we have data now that kids were killed by these vaccines. So let's look at this now and carry on a bit. Here's that testimony about social distancing and masking, right? So, hey, have you followed any of those studies? No, but I believe there were a lot of conflicting studies, too, that there are those say that, maybe had an impact. I don't know. Weasel words from a weasel. So this is fascinating, though, is how this has turned into an absolute. Well, let's listen in. Let's listen to how Democrats, who theoretically are supposed to be for the downtrodden, for the oppressed, for the children, we would hope, but not in the way maybe they've shown up lately for children. I know what you're thinking. Let's listen in. Here's Representative Mafume.
Dr. Fauci, we owe you an apology for the way we have raked you through the mud, and none of us have said to you, here's where you go to get your good name and your reputation back. Dr. Fauci.
His good name and his reputation. Well, that means that this gentleman has not read The Real Anthony Fauci by RFK Jr. He doesn't understand what Fauci did during the entire AIDS epidemic, personally responsible for the deaths of many, many people unnecessarily through that crisis. Then what he has done personally to help foster the idea that COVID and other circulating pathogens actually came out of not despite, but because of our bioweapons programs. It was all for research. We were just trying to help. We were just trying to make these things so we could understand if these things did happen naturally, which they wouldn't because we put them together. How would we, how could our enemies use them? And also how would we maybe develop vaccines against those, right? So speaking of which, this just came up. So remember just last week, there was this big thing and all these, these horrifying so-called YouTube or Twitter doctors, right, that are all trying to defend the vaccines and the COVID vaccines. They came out and said, oh, there was this big study out of the UK which showed that vaccinating in children was safe and effective. But it was a kind of a model study, and they had a lot of data. And oh, by the way, they couldn't show you the data. But trust us, bro, right? Yeah, no, none of us have any trust about that stuff anymore. But if we look here now at deaths, this is myocardial infarction, heart attacks, occlusive heart attacks, and heart attack deaths in 18 to 29-year-olds. So these are the youths. They're not supposed to have a whole lot of these heart attacks. They do happen. But when you get a big, giant spike in deaths like this in 2021, in the second half after the vaccine rollout, you would say, wow, we got some questions here. And look at that big middle finger of deaths showing up in our youngest, right? This is horrifying stuff, horrifying. So when asked about that, about the vaccines, listen to the question, listen to the answer.
And do you also agree that it saved hundreds of thousands and possibly millions of lives in America and across the world?
That is absolutely correct. And it's very clear that it's saved millions of lives here and throughout the world. The Europeans have done the same studies that we have, and the data are incontrovertible that they save lives.
Sir, and do you think
that right there is a lie? We don't have that data. In fact, if we had collected the data appropriately, we might be able to answer that question incontrovertibly. So we still have these epidemiological studies kicking around on the outside, which do show that youths died from heart attacks, that we have a vast increase in all kinds of other diseases and things like cancer. That's all there. Now, we can't definitively say where they came from, but you can because of the temporal association. Hey, here's this new thing we started doing, and hey, here are all these new maladies that showed up right in alignment with that temporally. So that's generally how you do things. Hey, wow, there was this loud noise over there, and that dude has a smoking gun. I didn't see the bullet, but now I have a hole in my chest. I think we could put 2 + 2 together and hopefully arrive at 4, because that's how math still works in my head. So for Fauci to say that incontrovertible, it is not incontrovertible. It absolutely isn't. But also this idea, again, still 4 years into this. Come on, 4 years in. No nuance, no subtlety, no saying, you know what, it's incontrovertible for people who are over the age of 75 with one or more comorbidities that we can tell you about a net positive benefit for COVID deaths compared to the other maladies that they might get as a consequence of getting the shot. I mean, I think you could probably make a risk-adjusted case there, but of course, you'd have to have that data, and I haven't seen that data. So he's just lying like crazy here right now. This is a lie, full on. Oh, but your good reputation, sir. I'm so sorry you won't have a chance to get your good reputation. When did not harming children become a political thing? I didn't realize. When is it that by the way, all these people saying Fauci needs to have his good name resurrected, all Democrats, right? Since when is that a Democrat? What? Since when was being a decent human being who doesn't want to harm our children a left-right thing? I don't get it, right? It doesn't make any sense to me. It's a very bizarre world that we now find ourselves in. And by the way, it's getting more and more troubling that way. Let's keep listening here.
I think the American public should listen to America's brightest and best doctors and scientists, or instead listen to podcasters, conspiracy theorists, and unhinged Facebook memes?
That is a very fair and balanced question right there. Let me think on that one. I'm going to go with the people who didn't put people on ventilators and remdesivir and killed them. I'm going to go with the people who didn't recommend giving life-ending amounts of midazolam and morphine to people instead of trying to save their lives. I'm going to go with the people who didn't mask children, who had literally zero, as close to zero of a risk as you could from COVID, and instead let them develop normally, put them outside, let them see sunshine, friends, and live as normal life as they could. I'm going to go with the people that didn't pull masking and social distancing requirements and mandates out of thin air. And I'm being polite with that one. Oh, I'm going to go with the people who didn't mandate and force people and coerce them to take an untested medical treatment, which turned out to be very, very toxic and harmful for a lot of people. Oh, and I'm going to go with the people, the podcasters, yeah, and the conspiracy theorists there, Mr. Garcia, who also understood the subtle nuance that COVID didn't strike everybody equally. It's not like, oh, you either have COVID or you don't. Very simple. This is simple. I know this is going to be hard for you because the hair gel is probably creating circulation issues up there. I don't know, because this isn't that hard, Mr. Garcia. Follow along if you can. The older you are, the more of a risk you had from any disease, including something like COVID. The more comorbidities, the less healthy you are, the more problems you had. Oh, by the way, just in case you were wondering, the tightest data we have on COVID was that if you had less than 30 nanograms per ml of vitamin D in your serum, you had a much tougher run of it. If you were under 20, you almost certainly ended up in the ICU. And if you were under 10, you died. And above 50, nobody really showed up in the ICUs. Where was my Mr. Garcia? If this podcaster and conspiracy theorist would have been glad to say, hey, why don't we just put a few $100,000, maybe a couple million into vitamin D tablets for everybody and educate the public about that, and then we would actually have had a very different outcome. That's what we expected from somebody like Fauci and the NIH. $20-30 billion budgets, and they couldn't even figure out that vitamin D worked like that. We have more papers about that than anything else you could possibly want. Where's my national vitamin D program? I'm waiting. Oh, you don't have one. That's because you're a piece of S. Okay? Let's just make sure we're absolutely clear about that.
Listening to people who you just described is going to do nothing but harm people, because they will deprive themselves of life-saving interventions, which has happened. And
this was the guy who broke the study on Remdesivir. You're not supposed to do that. You run a randomized controlled trial. They peaked the results halfway through, stopped the trial, came out on national TV and said, oh, this works. But instead, Remdesivir doesn't actually work. In fact, they found a statistical anomaly in the middle of the trial, right? Not if you only took it for 5 days, but not 10 days. If you took it for longer, there was no benefit, but not this much oxygen, but you had to be in oxygen. So this little window of time in oxygen, they found this one little part in a mosaic of possible results and said, oh, look, it works. That's called cherry picking, and it doesn't work. And in fact, the mortality benefit was negative. So actually, if you listen to this guy, you didn't have access to life-saving medicines. You had access to a quicker path to the grave. That's the truth. And I can't believe that we're still struggling with these very, very simple concepts at this late stage. This is all written down. I mean, this is easy. This is science. Very annoying to a guy like me.
some have done studies. Peter Hotez has done an analysis of this and shows that in people who refuse to get vaccinated for any variety of reasons, probably responsible for an additional 200,000 to 300,000 deaths in this.
Really? 200,000 to 300,000 deaths because you didn't get vaccinated. You know, here's the thing. If there was a giant pandemic of the unvaccinated, if it was unvaccinated right now, if there was that pandemic of the unvaccinated, if it was true that it was unvaccinated soccer stars pitching over on the field, if it was true that unvaccinated people were dying suddenly in their beds at home in the middle of the night, if it was true that it were the unvaccinated who were suddenly experiencing vast quantities of these turbo cancers, you know what would happen? You'd be hearing about it 24/7. There would be studies. You know why we don't hear anything about that? Because there's no data supporting that, so they're not looking into it because they don't like the answer they're going to get. I call this the cop shoot video scenario. If it's a good shoot, you're going to see that video on Twitter, usually within 24 hours of the event. If it's not a good shoot, and they do happen, now there's privacy issues, and you're going to have to FOIA it out of our hands. Oh no, we lost the thumb drive that it was on. Where did it go? When you have data that can support the narrative, you see it right away. You know why you haven't seen, this is the dog that didn't bark, right? You know, Arthur Conan Doyle, the Sherlock Holmes piece. You know why you haven't seen all those studies showing who it is that's pitching over and dying suddenly, getting the cancers? You want to know why? because they already have the answer, and you know what the answer is. We both know what the answer is. It's just how it is. If the data was on their side, you'd have heard about it. So this is just flat out lying, more lying. And I can't believe that this has become a political thing. I thought I grew up in the country where there was some gross knowledge of good versus evil, right versus wrong, that you couldn't, it's like, I would love to have kids develop normally and not take a medical treatment that actually shortens their life or renders it terrible because they have a chronic condition now. But you know what? That would be inconvenient for my political party. So I'm going to have to kind of go with hurting the kids. I don't know how we got to here. I really don't. This is horrifying as well. But this also gets,
so Dr. Fauci, can you please share with us the nature of the threats you have received since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yes, there have been everything from harassments by emails, texts, letters of myself, my wife, my three daughters. There have been credible death threats leading to the arrests of 2 individuals. And credible death threats mean someone who clearly was on their way to kill me. And it's required my having protective services essentially all the time. It is very troublesome to me. It is much more troublesome because they've involved my wife and my 3 daughters.
At these moments, how do you feel?
How do you feel? What a Democrat
Keep your
question.
mic on.
Terrible.
Do you continue to receive threats today?
Yes, I do. Every time someone gets up and says I'm responsible for the death of people throughout the world, the death threats go up.
Could possibly drum up a little sympathy for this character if he displayed any concern at all for the deaths that he ended up causing through Remdesivir, the failure to act using ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, vitamin D, the inappropriate and mandates of masking and distancing and vaccines and all of that other stuff. Just a giant series of colossal errors. And for him to come out and try and pretend like he actually cares about anybody, including his own family, not just his own pathetic soul here, is bad. His acting doesn't get me. My wife and children. Come on, buddy. We all know you don't feel anything. That's how you were able to kill all those people all those years. We know that. Okay. All right. So let's go now to this last piece here. Let me see if we got that one. Yep. Let's tune in here. This is not good.
However, allegations by my Republican colleagues, amplified in the media, have led to real, tangible consequences for Dr. Fauci in his personal life in a way that should be unacceptable to all Americans. Dr. Fauci, you and I have known each other for a long time, and I'm not even going to admit how long. But during that time, I've seen your commitment not just to science, but to advancing the greater good.
Oh, like masks, that kind of science? Dingle, Debbie Dingle there. He's actually had to face consequences for his actions. You're right. That is so un-American. Every American certainly must agree with you that that's terrible, that somebody would do an absolutely objectively horrifyingly bad job and that they would somehow have to face some sort of level of professional shame or consequences over that. You're right. That is so un-American, Debbie. What an amazing thing. May I remind you, Debbie, that under Fauci's amazing leadership, according to you, the United States had one of the highest recorded, and I don't believe the official numbers, but taking them at face value, one of the highest recorded COVID death rates per 100,000. Way worse than Uttar Pradesh, India. Way worse than Africa. Did you ever think to ask him, like, hey, Fauci, I think you did a really amazing job. Super. Like, nobody could have done better, but how is it that the death rate in the United States was several orders of magnitude higher than other parts of the world? Can you explain that at all? Do you have an answer? Have you looked into that? This is just that it's political football at this point in time with something that destroyed lives, killed people, destroyed livelihoods, that there's zero concern about that. There's concern for Fauci's reputation. There's concern that he's maybe faced some stern questioning. There's no concern over all the lives lost and ruined. How is this even the world I live in? How is this even my country? I don't understand this at this point in time. So that's crazy time. All right. That's what I have for you out here in public on YouTube and on Rumble, but I'm going to be taking the rest of my discussion for my subscribers, as usual, for Scouting Reports, back over to Peak Prosperity. If you want to come and hear more about what's going on in the world, of course, I'm parsing through all the news from the weekend, and today's Monday, so there's a lot of news to go through. So with that, thanks very much for listening right now. We'll be back with you as soon as we can. Don't let Fauci get away with this, and don't let the people who are trying to turn him into some sort of a martyr or some sort of a figure that we ought to have some sympathy for. I don't even know how you get there. My Venn diagram doth not overlap with those folks, even slightly. All right. See you next time. Bye.